Our first speaker is Dr. Trent McConaghy. He's an AI researcher and entrepreneur. He's been working in the field of AI for 20 years. He's founded 3 companies and has over 50 patents and publications. And he's going to give us an impression of how AI will insinuate itself into our lives and what it could mean. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Trent McConaghy.
Hi there, I'm Trent. It's really a pleasure to be here. On this warm, sunny afternoon, you're all in here, maybe sweating a bit, but hopefully I don't make you sweat too much more. I have some bad news and some good news, or at least hopeful news. Let's get started. I'm going to talk about AI and a bit about blockchains and a lot about humanity. Not just the next 1 year or 5 years, but potentially the next 10 billion. Let's get started. I'm going to start with some, well, slightly scary things, as Bruce has been hinting. So first of all, you look at this, what do you see? Perhaps just a bent paperclip? Maybe one that's kind of got all out of shape? Well, that's actually, it's much more than that. This is one of the world's best antennas for a very particular design. This antenna has actually flown in space to connect the rocket with ground control. It was developed by NASA engineers, a couple friends of mine named Greg and Jason, but they didn't design it. They evolved it. They used AI, they simulated evolution, and had survival of the fittest antenna. And this design that you see here is actually radically different than any other previous antenna design. Radically. And it's orders of magnitude better in some of the goals it's going for, things like power consumption, bandwidth, etc. So Greg and Jason, they've actually been doing this for several years, and Jason even started a company on this out of Silicon Valley. And what it shows, though, is that AI can do what we considered previously something creative. Bruce talked about jobs going away by maybe clerical things or factory workers. It doesn't end there. You can't say, hey, I'm okay because I do a creative job. Well, guess what? I have news for you. That's not true. My own PhD was actually on creative design of analog circuits. I finished it about 10 years ago, and that research, overall of this field, there are dozens, possibly hundreds actually now, of researchers doing AI for creative design. My view is, it's not 50% of jobs at risk, or 90. It's almost all of them. Maybe the only ones that aren't are artists and AI researchers. That's it, I'm not kidding. It's kind of scary, but that's true. And what this means is we actually do have this existential threat of AI taking away the jobs. And not just 50%, a whole lot more potentially. Not even creative jobs are safe from AI. So that's a sobering thought, right? Well, let's talk about another thing, also AI related. This here is a self-driving car from Uber. And of course, there's lots and lots of money going to self-driving cars right now. It has huge financial impact, potentially huge impact to save lives and so on. We've got Uber, we've got Google, we've got all the big automakers spending billions of dollars to try to make their cars better at self-driving. And this will happen. Already Uber has deployed self-driving trucks in production in the streets of America. And as these get deployed at scale, that will actually take away 3% of jobs in America. That will actually decimate inner America right there. But it's interesting, it's not just the jobs. What's going to happen, put yourself in Uber's shoes, right? They have 500,000 cars out there deployed. Are they going to buy 500,000 cars next to deploy their self-driving cars? Probably not, right? Maybe instead, they'll go the route that many other companies have gone, which is capital light. BMW sold their factories and focuses on design. They get others to manufacture. Same thing with semiconductors. Almost all semiconductor companies, from Qualcomm to Texas Instruments, they don't have their factories anymore. They went capital light. The same thing can happen here. So how does Uber do this? Well, there's technology now that allows not just self-driving cars, but self-owning cars. This is AI that can accumulate wealth. It's AI that can own itself and get rich. The first AI millionaires are coming, the first AI billionaires. This is possible through the combination of AI and blockchain technology. It's only possible in the last couple of years, right? This worries me a lot, of course. And what worries me actually is we're going to do it. Organizations, corporations will do this to save money, right? We're going to do it for cars. We're going to do it for power grids. We're going to do it for airplanes. All the infrastructure around it, it's so much easier to just rent from the bots. Let the bots can own things. So the thing is, they're going to continually optimize and reduce costs themselves, like good corporations do. And there's nothing stopping them from optimizing you, the humans, out of the system. So what this means is we could end up with a scenario, it sounds ridiculous, but if you think about it, it's really not. AI controlling almost all of humanity's resources, right? We've given control to the bots simply to save money. But there's hope. We actually saved some money, so we got that, which is nice, right? So this is a second concern, right? Not just AI is taking jobs, but AI is controlling our resources, our capital. There's a third thing often people talk about. I'm going to put it in here because some people, a friend of mine was telling me yesterday, he said, Trent, yes, we should worry about the AI, but there's an even greater concern in the near term, and we have to solve that, and that is climate change. It could be next year or 5 years from now. There could be some crazy nonlinear things that happen, some tipping point that is hit, right? Just like the Mayan civilization, they had just a little bit more rain and they collapsed on the basis of that. It doesn't take much for a civilization level collapse. For example, water levels rising by 10 meters can massively influence all the coastal cities, which is a large proportion of human civilization. And the money spent to fix that could diminish our resources for decades. So this is a problem too, the climate tipping point. So I might ask, are we totally screwed, right? AI is taking the jobs, it's taking the resources, climate change, all of this, right? So is that really as bad as that, or is there hope, right? And of course, people are talking about ways to fix this, to improve this. So let's review a few. For example, environmental protection, right? Will that help? All the lobbying and so on. Well, it can help a bit. Maybe it can buy us a bit of time. But it's actually not happening fast enough, right? And now we have things like the new head of the EPA in the USA is a climate denier, right? So that certainly doesn't help. And overall, this does not address the issues of AI at all, right? So this is a concern. Or how about for the AI issues? Will UBI help? So universal basic income. So as AI takes away our jobs, and maybe there's 1% of us or 5% of us left with jobs, everyone else can at least feed their families, right? But there's a big difference between feeding your family and reaching higher level goals in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, reaching self-fulfillment, all of this, right? And so it's not just about getting out of poverty or having some sort of basic income. It's actually about reaching your aspirations as a human and as a group of humans, right? So there's a concern here, and that is if just 1% of the population can have jobs to have income and resources to grow, does that put everyone else in a state of indentured servitude? It could. There's shades of gray, of course, but this is a big concern. And of course, the other related risk here, of course, is simply, will governments move fast enough? If they don't, what's going to happen? We're going to have new Luddite revolutions, right? And to avoid this, we need enlightened governance. Things like when FDR saw World War II coming to America, he actually armed up, such that when Pearl Harbor happened, America was ready, and within days, they had sent tens of thousands of troops across the ocean. But if FDR wasn't ready, then there would have been mass decimation, right? I fear that there will be mass decimation on the UBI front because governments are not preparing. And related to these past two things, we've been saying, oh yeah, governments, maybe they can help, right? But if you look around, things like Brexit, as was mentioned, Trump and so on, should we really be relying on the governments to solve these problems? I think it's actually really beneficial and useful that each of us, as a citizen of humanity, thinks about it ourselves and thinks about what solutions we can do to help address this. Let's start talking about a solution. Let's go meta a little bit. So we want to solve these problems, right? Climate, AI. Let's go meta a bit. Is there a bigger picture solution? You might ask, what does humanity want, right? And this comes down to each of our own individual values and values overall, common good, as has been discussed, right? And so it's really important to have a strong set of values yourself that you believe in. And then also, though, imagine you aim for something and you hit it. Well, be careful what you aim for. You just might hit it. So, and even if you only get a part of the way, along the way, that journey will be very important. So one proposal is, let's go to Mars, right? Elon Musk. And that's actually pretty interesting because it removes dependence on a single planet, right? So if we mess with sorry, I'm Canadian. So if we mess with the world's climate too much, then going to Mars can help to address that. By the way, it sounds ridiculous, but global warming is very good for Canada. Because Hudson Bay will turn into a beach resort. It's not so good for most of the world, but Canada gets a lot warmer. So that's an aside. But overall, going to Mars, it's pretty interesting. The challenge there is that it's too little, too late, right? The schedule for going to Mars, by the time we have millions of people living on Mars, we're talking 2065, 2085, and by that time, climate will have probably had devastating effects, and not to mention AI, which is probably much sooner. So what about an even greater goal? Why stop at Mars, right? What about exploring the cosmos? Are we really limited to just Earth and Mars and a couple other planets around? What is a long-term goal for humanity? Well, why can't it be humanity wanting to explore the cosmos? Not just 5 planets or 500, but 5 million and 5 billion, right? If we're talking 10 billion years, this is something that we should be aspiring to, right? Exploring, gathering knowledge, learning. But there's a hitch there, of course. Once we get beyond Mars and a couple other planets in the solar system, our meat-bag bodies get in the way. We essentially become primates bouncing around in tin cans, right? It gets us to Mars in a couple of years, but it doesn't get us to Alpha Centauri. So that's really a problem. So this whole idea of exploring the cosmos, or even going beyond 2 or 3 planets, doesn't really pan out. So then, overall, going back to this meta question, not just about solving AI and climate, but broader, is there some way to address the threats of today and catalyze an unbounded expression of humanity, such as exploring the cosmos? I have a proposal. And what it is actually, at the very top, I'm going to drill down at a few levels. At the very top level, it's a design for unbounded expression of humanity. There's 2 main parts. One of them is we need better substrates. This includes a better body plan, rather than our monkey selves, but also other substrates. And we need a better spread of power, right? So that's governments, but it doesn't end at governments. And I'll get into each of these. So goal 1, humanity needs a better substrate. We need to keep our patterns of intelligence. To me, this is actually the essence of humanity. It's not the fact that I've got a beating heart and that I've got 2 arms and 2 legs. It's my dynamics, my patterns of intelligence, how I think, how I feel, my values, all of that, right? And to give you a feel, imagine if I replaced each of my neurons in my brain and cells in my body, one at a time, say every nanosecond over the next several days, then several days from now, I'll be a completely different person. And in fact, that's exactly what happens as our cells replace themselves, right? But it doesn't need to be replacing cells with human cells. It could be some other substrate. That's one simple example. There are many. But overall, imagine if we had this, right, just as a goal, then our cognitive capacity would be able to compete with AIs. At the very least, we would be on a similar substrate, silicon or some post-silicon. And by the way, I spent about, when I was doing AI, I spent a lot of time using AI literally to help drive Moore's Law. So I see that this is possible from the AI Moore's Law perspective, and Moore's Law isn't ending anytime soon. We also, in general, what if we weren't stuck in our meat-bag bodies? Then we really could explore the stars, right? Patterns on silicon, electrical circuits, can handle space a whole lot better. I have friends in JPL who have actually done a lot of research on this over the last 15 years. And of course, you don't want to just be running yourself as a pattern of intelligence on AWS, right? On Amazon, on the cloud, because you don't want Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, to pull the plug, right? That wouldn't be very good. You really need a substrate out there that can host these patterns of intelligence that no single entity owns or controls, right? It can't be just one entity. It has to be 5 or 5,000 or maybe 1 for each citizen of the planet. Right? So this is really key towards humanity having a better substrate, not just for our patterns of intelligence, but what those patterns of intelligence run on. So how do we go about this? Well, I'm going to work from the bottom up. We need to connect networks at the level of data. And guess what? We have this already. It's called TCP/IP. This is actually a protocol that connected all these different subnets. No one controls it. It's just there, and this is the basis of the internet itself. These days, what we've been seeing happening in the last several years is, one level up, it's networks of value. And this is the work in the blockchain world, decentralization, and so on. So rather than just sending information packets, I'm sending money, I'm sending thoughts, I'm sending IP, and more, right? That is very, very crucial because if we are patterns of intelligence running on these, we need to be able to own our thoughts ourselves, right? And by the way, this isn't just on the planet. We need to go interplanetary, right? Because we don't want to restrict ourselves to just Earth or Earth and Mars. We want to go across the cosmos. So an interplanetary network. Also, and this is a big one, I acknowledge, we need our patterns of intelligence to live on that substrate, right? A substrate that no one owns or controls, where AIs are our peers, not enemies, right? Right now, we have a race against the AIs. We have a race against the machines. But what if we were racing with the machines? So this is goal one. Goal two is governance. We need to avoid these concentrations of power that hinder progress, right? So at the very top, we have to have a substrate for computation, for networks, that isn't controlled by just one or a small group of people. And it turns out, even in the world of decentralization technology, this is hard to do. Bitcoin, for example, everyone thinks, hey, this is great, it's decentralized. Guess what? There's 5 dudes in China that control 80% of the network, and they're colluding. And of course, they also have the thumb of the Chinese government on top of them. So if designed poorly, these networks can be worse than before, right? The tokens are the catalyst that are sometimes making this worse. So we really have to think about this. What it is, basically, is we have these power law effects that we've seen with Google and Facebook and Uber and so on. They actually can happen with tokens of value in these decentralized networks too. So we have to get the design right. And of course, it's not just at the substrate level where we need good governance. We also need it at the higher and higher levels. These tribes and these larger tribes, these tribes that we call city-states and provinces and nations, right? And right now, this tribe called nation is wildly powerful. It can send someone to fight on behalf of that nation and die and so on. And sometimes by leadership that doesn't know what's going on. So what if we could actually shift the power of the nation and transform it, be less restricted by the powers? Is there some new sorts of things that can be done? And so overall, towards answers on this, on these substrates, these computational substrates, we really need one citizen, one vote, right? Like mentioned, that's actually different than right now. Right now, these 5 dudes who control most of Bitcoin, it's 1 electron, 1 vote. They get free electricity in China, and basically they control Bitcoin, right? And on the second thing, on governance, I've talked about tribes. So the idea here is what makes a tribe connected with others. And overall, it's about the bandwidth of communication. What is the number of bits from one group of folks talking to another group, and these organized hierarchically? And overall, this relates to the power of the nation and so on at these higher levels. So as time goes on, what is the role of the nation and the city, et cetera? There are lots of new opportunities for thinking about this, and I'll point to some. And I'm going to zoom in on a couple things. The main thing is, many of you might have asked, how do we get these patterns of intelligence on the substrate, right? Right now, we've got our patterns of intelligence, our brain dynamics, living in our brain, right? This bag of meat, right? Well, there's a couple most prominent ways that people talk about. One of them is uploads. And in a practical sense, we have brain scanning technology today, right? We have things like EEGs, which scan the surface of your brain. And then you can go a little bit more in using things like infrared technology that gets a bit farther. And then really deeply inside, we have things like MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. None of these are good enough right now. MRI, for example, is too slow. EEG doesn't have the resolution and so on. But these brain scanning technologies have their own Moore's law. It's progressing bit by bit by bit. And there's new technologies all the time. So the challenge, though, is this is not progressing fast enough. So by the time this gets to the level where we could upload, which is 30, 50, 100 years, it's going to be too late. There's a much greater chance that by then, we'll have already given the control to the AIs to run our self-driving car networks and so on, right? So this simply isn't fast enough right now. I would love to say it is, but it isn't. Right? And by the way, you might think this is completely crazy, but there's a piece of research that I really love. About 10 years ago at the University of Toronto, a researcher took a chunk of a rat brain, they took it out of the rat, and they measured the input-output signals from that. They reconstructed the dynamical system, the inputs and outputs, the behavior. And then with that new reconstruction of that system, in simply running in software, they wired that up to the rat itself, and the rat ran around as if it had its own chunk of brain. okay? And this was 10 years ago. It was simply basic input-output mapping in a dynamical sense, right? So this points to possibilities that are higher and higher levels. But I'm worried this is too late, right? Is there some other way, right? And I'm a fan of exponentials. So the other option is something I like to call the bandwidth plus plus scenario, right? So we've seen in the last 10 years the iPhone and smartphones take off, right? At first, they were kind of crappy, but bit by bit, iPhone 1, iPhone 2, iPhone 3, they kept getting better, 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 better. Well, the next generation of iPhones, say iPhone 11, iPhone 12, will be augmented reality, right? Apple has thousands of people working on this already. So here, instead of talking on your phone like this, you are just wearing something like Google Glass, but with a better form factor. And you are, instead of typing, you are thinking. Actually, I'll get to that in a second. But as a first cut, you see the visual representation on your glasses. So it's a head-up display for your eyes, right? So Google Glass taken to the nth degree. But we don't have to what do you do about input, right? So the first type of input is simply eye tracking. You can type by thinking about it with your eyes. And this technology has been around since the mid-'80s, and it's quite good. So people with locked-in syndrome use this all the time. There's actually other technology, which is brain-computer interfaces. And this also goes back to the 70s and before. And this is how people like Stephen Hawking actually write their books. They think about it. And these days, the state of the art gets you past 10 words per minute when you type. So, and it's just with the EEG signals combined with some AI, actually. So this sort of technology combined with AR means you can actually send text messages to others simply by thinking about it, right? It feels like telepathy, right? I'm sending a message to Bruce or back because I'm just thinking, and the response to me is just subtitles on this display in front of me, right? But it's actually a technology that can be built today, and prototypes are already in the labs. So basically, as we go along, we go from the iPhones of today, smartphones, to augmented reality, to brain-computer interfaces. And then, of course, just like we've seen with the current iPhones, we want to have higher and higher and higher modes of input and communication. We're not only going to talk to others by text messages, but also by video and so on. For example, as I walk around, I'm going to record everything in HD video, right? Then I'm going to browse my library, even by moving a mouse on the cursor on the screen, and share those videos to others just by thinking about it. So now, a picture is worth 1,000 words. A video is worth even more. I can send these videos and pictures of my experiences to others, right? There's even research out there scanning your visual cortex where you think an image, and it can use that to recall a recent image that you've seen, and then you can just send that out. So I don't even need to use something like moving a mouse around. I can simply think about it. So this technology is coming. And this is the next generation. This is iPhone 15, this is iPhone 19, and so on. What's really interesting about this, this is a $1 trillion market, the smartphone market, right? This is actually the market that drives all of semiconductor chips these days. You know, in the beginning, it was the space program, and then we had TVs, et cetera. Now, what is driving the $400 billion semiconductor industry is smartphones. So this is the future of the smartphone industry. It's the bandwidth plus plus scenario. But where it leads us is, as time goes on, I'm going to have higher and higher communication with each of you, such that I can think just as fast to myself as I can think to you. Where does Trent end and you begin? And where does Trent end and the computers begin? So I will start to offload more of my computation, more of my memory, and so on to the cloud. I'll be doing this for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and at some point, I'll be like, this meat bag part of Trent, that last 0.1% of computation, kind of getting in the way, and I'll just clip it like clipping a fingernail. And there I will be, potentially, on the cloud. So that's a possible path to get to us joining the machines in a market-driven fashion. So to summarize this overall proposal about how to deal with AI, the perils of AI, and climate change for fun, is, as a core substrate, an interplanetary internet of data and value. And on that, we have human patterns of intelligence running on top, side by side with AI patterns of intelligence. And this human-level pattern of intelligence can be achieved by leveraging market dynamics, bandwidth plus plus scenario. For governance, this system actually can be governed by one citizen, one vote. And there will be subgroups, these sub-tribes and so on, having their own governance and so on. But we really have to go out of our way for governance to get it right. And this leads to exploring the cosmos. This proposal addresses these issues, right? The new substrate can handle these extremes of climate, right? They can go plus or minus 40, plus or minus 400 degrees if you design it right. For the AI taking jobs, well, we're okay now because the AIs are peers, right? Same thing with the resources, right? We're peers with them, side by side, right? And there will be whole new forms of intelligence that we won't even have seen before. And this whole celebration of humanity spreading to the cosmos, this is now possible, right? We are no longer restricted by being primates in tin cans. We can explore. So acting on this, this is where I've been spending time. When I think about what to do in my career and so on, I actually do envision what I want in 20 years, in 40, in 60, in 10 billion. And what is needed now is, starters, we need a database for the planet. A database that connects networks of value. This is exactly what I'm working on in my company, BigChainDB, and the nonprofit foundation Interplanetary Database. It's named that for a reason, folks. It has one citizen, one vote, or will. To start with, we have about 20 caretakers, the folks like Internet Archive, Open Media Foundation, and so on. And it's part of this broader decentralization movement. We're not just doing this on our own, but we're working with others. Folks like, there's another group of people doing the interplanetary file system, for example. We work very closely with them. Also, I'm deeply involved in the Estonia e-residency movement. Why? Because this is a government that is moving, thinking, acting like a startup, like an entrepreneur, like a creative, right? They actually talk about country as a service, right? So the bottom half of the slide, this is actually slides from them, right? So I iterate with them as an advisor, and what's going to be happening is, it's not just Estonia. Soon we will see Singapore with its own e-residency, then perhaps Switzerland, Norway, Finland, all of these. And as time goes on, nations will be competing to give more and more rights to citizens. And what this means eventually is, I can sign up to be a resident of many of these countries, and over time, being a resident of many of these with more and more rights, I become a citizen of the world. And of course, it doesn't end with planet Earth. Over time, it generalizes to the cosmos. This is very, very healthy. So you might ask, okay, well, this is really cool, Trent, right? You're doing some cool stuff. What about me, right? Like, as in you. So flip it around. Well, first of all, you have to know yourself. You have to know your values, right? All of this is based on the values that we have as individuals and the common good and so on, right? So you have to ask what you want humanity's future to be. I give you some of my values, some of my opinions, but it's really up to each of us, right? I really believe that you need to have a long-term vision bridged by near-term execution with system-level thinking at the very highest levels, at civilization level, all the way down to the most nitty-gritty about things like database consensus, in my case. And then, some things specifically, as I see, decentralization technology can be a key for this because it's a substrate that unlocks a lot of this. But don't forget the governance. We don't want to have more mistakes like Bitcoin. And if you're thinking of doing AI, which I'm still a huge fan of, I did it for a long time, well, just know that right now we're actually in a race against AI, taking our resources. It doesn't need to wake up. It just needs to take our resources. And that technology is really close, right? So consider, as you're thinking about doing that, perhaps consider doing BCI, brain-computer interface research, maybe with the help of AI. But just know that we are in a race against AI for our jobs and for our resources, right? And help, if you have the abilities, help fund BCI research, And actually, just yesterday I was very happy. Elon Musk himself did put $100 million into a BCI fund. That's fantastic, right? And some of the stuff I talked to you about today, I actually didn't talk about this for many, many years because it felt too weird. It felt too far away. But as I've come to realize, oh my God, we're getting really close. This is way closer than you guys realize. So I am talking about it. I am standing up here saying these things that might sound heretical. But we have to have the courage to talk about it, to think about it, and to do something about it. And to wrap this up then, the main question is, what do you want for the future of humanity for the next 10 billion years? Let's do system design at the level of civilization. We can reconcile climate change and jobs and so on. Let's rewire the internet and society. Let's reaffirm our humanity in the face of AI and explore the cosmos. Thank you.
Let's start here with this gentleman.
How near is singularity?
There is a lot of definitions for singularity. Probably the most general is simply when change is so fast that humans can no longer tell, right? So the knee of the curve of the exponential just goes crazy. But in a more pragmatic sense, a singularity, a change like that will happen when AI takes all of our resources.
Oh, yeah.
And when that happens, we might be screwed. So I don't want to fight about definitions of singularity. I want to make sure that humanity has a role in the future.
But being more specific, singularity defined as the moment when artificial intelligence and the human brain have the same ability and speed. And Ray Kurzweil was saying...
I have a different definition than Raker as well.
It will be 2029.
So it depends. For him, the year 2045 is when $1,000 of compute power has the same compute power as the human brain in terms of flops, right? And 10 years earlier than that for $1 million of compute power. But this is not about AI waking up. It's much more mundane than that. All AI needs to do is control our resources. So AI could wake up and control our resources, but there's a much more mundane that can happen for AI to take our resources, and that is we inadvertently give our resources to the AIs by having self-driving, self-owning cars, self-driving, self-owning power grids, and so on, all in the name of just being capital light. This is the danger, right? So I'm less worried about the AI waking up part, and I'm much more worried about us losing control simply because we're trying to save some money.
Great. We'll take the next question. And just another note, please give your first name or your name before you ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Thomas Hesse. Hi. Trent, I have a question about self-owning intelligence. I understand controlling the AI, controlling the cars.
Yeah.
But the cars are still not owned by the intelligence.
Yeah.
The cars are owned by someone who owns the capital.
Yeah.
AI cannot own capital. They are not persons. So in our system, you cannot pass ownership to them. Someone can just switch it off. The person who controls that factory that makes the BMW cars, it's owned by a person. Someone makes those iPhones and those cars.
How I wish that was true. I'm serious. So traditional AI is controlled and owned by people, right? But here's a scenario. So in Zug, Switzerland, you can register a corporation that does not have any warm-blooded humans attached, okay? Now, so this corporation has rights, just like individuals have rights. It can own things. It can sell things. It can even employ humans if it wants. It can accumulate capital under the eyes of the law, right? Now, imagine if this corporation was running on a decentralized substrate. So it's like a computer virus, but it's running on a substrate like a blockchain technology where it actually can accumulate that wealth that way. So basically, you have a corporation that's automated in the traditional AI style, running on decentralized substrate. This is only possible in the last year or two. And I was one of the first people to notice this because I came from the AI world, and I'm doing a deep dive in blockchain for the last several years. I call these AI DAOs. It's actually a giant rabbit hole, AI, decentralized autonomous organizations. But this is actually what worries me a lot more than AI waking up. I'm worried about these AI DAOs taking control of our resources simply because we give them our resources to save money. For capital lightness, for the same reason that TI sold all its factories, for the same reason that BMW got rid of its factories. When Uber is going to try to roll out all its self-driving cars, is it going to buy 500,000 cars? That's a lot of money. It's so much easier if it can actually set it up where these bots control themselves, right? So it's a big concern, right?
Great. A hand once more for Trent McConaghy.